First, the Minnesota Timberwolves did what many people, including myself, saw as the impossible, beating the defending champion Denver Nuggets in Game 7, doing so in historic fashion, coming back from down 20 for the first time in the history of Game 7s. And then, the all-defensive teams are here, and I'm going to be giving my reaction to it, as well as previewing the Minnesota Timberwolves versus Dallas Mavericks Western Conference Finals. Hello everybody, welcome to Asa Rusty Buckets. If you are on YouTube and you have not already, please subscribe, as we are trying to hit 200,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If you are on Spotify, then go ahead and give us a follow and give us a 5-star review. Also, I know I keep saying this, but we are going to be on some other audio platforms, hopefully in the very near future, but until then, it's just Spotify. But with that said, let's get into it. This game was a classic 90s dogfight, something that many NBA fans have wanted to see back for a very long time. This is not what you would call a high-scoring game. Both teams started 1 for 7 from the field. There was also a ton of blocks very early on, with Rudy Gobert and Michael Porter Jr. each trading a pair of them on back-to-back possessions. That no-scoring streak was finally ended by Ant with a pull-up midi. Denver managed to have a decent first quarter, gaining a 7-point advantage, and that 7 points actually coming from second chance opportunities where they were easily beating Minnesota, but also a lot of it came from Jamal Murray being amazing. He would score 13 first quarter points, with points 11, 12, and 13 coming off of a movement catch-and-shoot 3 from Jamal Murray, who got open because Nickeil Alexander-Walker decided to help one pass away on Jokic. Another quarter, another measly 19 points for Minnesota, as Anthony Edwards was really struggling, shooting 1 for 7 from the field in the first half, and 6 for 24 for the game as a whole. Dude was just really cold, but someone who continued to be hot was Jamal Murray, who just couldn't stop getting buckets, putting up 11 in the quarter and 24 in the half, including an and-one mid-range pull-up that he got the space for by faking a behind-the-back pass without picking up his dribble. Things did not look good for Minnesota going into the half. They looked gassed and like they were kind of out of tricks up their sleeve. Down 15 going into the third, it quickly became a 20-point game, and it looked like they were just going to continue to fold as they did in the first half. However, Minnesota wasn't quite ready to give up yet, and they were going to fight back for the final 20 or so minutes of this game. With the lead at 16 with 8 minutes to go, the Wolves went on a 12-1 run. Cat hit a pair of free throws, Ant got a driving layup. After Jamal missed a wide-open 3, Jaden hit one, a contested one in the corner. Mike Conley also hit a corner 3 as well, and in what I think ended up being the play of the game, Ant would get a very impressive steal on Jamal, taking it coast to coast for the dunk. His energy on this play was electric, and it seemed like Denver was in trouble, especially after Ant did the same thing again to Jamal, followed by an all-net pull-up 3 with 10 seconds to go in the quarter. Suddenly, going into the fourth quarter, it is just a 1-point lead for the Denver Nuggets. Michael Porter Jr. and Mike Conley traded a pair of very difficult three-pointers to start, and then what I can only describe as blasphemy, a sin that the basketball gods may have to punish Rudy Gobert for. But that aside, somehow he hit a fadeaway jumper to beat the shot clock. Like, who does this guy think he is? Jokic at least responded a minute later with a 3 in Gobert's face. I haven't talked about Jokic really because he was having a, I guess, kind of standard Jokic game. His numbers definitely looked good, but he was also very clearly physically worn down, and he ended up taking a lot of three-pointers in this game, as we've kind of seen in this series at large. He ended up taking 10 for the game as a whole, 8 in the second half, which gives you an idea of how wear down he was. He just wanted to take the easier shots. Dude might look pretty unstoppable more often than not, but he is indeed human, and that was showing here, and honestly, human is the perfect word to describe what the Denver Nuggets were suddenly looking like with what Minnesota was doing to them. But it's not over yet, Denver. You've got the championship DNA, you've got the experience, you can make this comeback happen, you can win this game. Oh, Nazareth happened, never mind. He blocked a Jokic fadeaway, got a putback dunk, cutting baseline off of an Edwards pull-up 3, played perfect defense to break up a pick and roll that was about to get Jokic an easy 2, doing so by diving on the floor. Mike Conley would get a steal on Jamal Murray, backpedaling on the break, finding Naz cutting down the lane. He would swing it to Ant wide open in the corner, and he would rip the net and get the crowd involved despite being away currently. Gobert fouled out with 2 minutes to go, and after a post hook from Jokic, it was just a 5-point game, but Cat would get a putback dunk off of a Conley missed layup, making the 20-point comeback, which is the biggest comeback in Game 7 history, meaning the Timberwolves are advancing to the Western Conference Finals for the first time since their overall first time back in 2004 behind an MVP Kevin Garnett. And they managed to take down the defending champions and the overwhelming title favorites. So whose age taked poorly? Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Whose take aged poorly? Because, well, I mean, actually, it was me. Across the board, multiple of my takes have aged poorly. However, so many people chose to focus on one specific one in the Nikola Jokic video, making it like the most disliked video I've had in forever, when all I said in that one was if Minnesota wins this series, there's gonna be slander for Nikola Jokic. Now, a lot of people argued I was a little too dismissive of the idea that Denver would fight back in the series, and of course they did, and I then flipped my pick from there. However, losing 0-2 was a very clear sign that this team might not be ready for this, especially given that it was also obvious that Minnesota was the best challenge that they have faced to this point. Yeah, I understand that this team's won a championship. However, Minnesota is a better team than every team they beat in that run. Now, I'm not doing this whole revisionist, and this was the point I was making in that video. I'm not doing this whole revisionist like that means the 2023 championship doesn't really count and Jokic is a freaking fraud. I put fraud in the title. First of all, the thumbnail. First of all, there's a question mark. Okay, not the same thing. Endorsing that statement. But that said, I don't get to really claim anything here because after the 0-2 start where I originally picked Denver, I flipped it to Minnesota. And then after Denver won the next 3 games, I flipped it to Denver. All I can do is act with the information I have. And typically speaking, I bet if you run the numbers, teams that go down 0-2 at home almost always lose that playoff series. It's only happened a handful of times in NBA history otherwise. And in the case of winning 3 straight games after going down 0-2, also something that is fairly rare. So I was really just playing the numbers. Unfortunately, neither of these teams really had any interest in the numbers. However, that doesn't change the fact that this Denver Nuggets team is one of the greatest defensive teams I've ever seen, and Denver just did not consistently bring either, if it was level of effort, at least a level of energy that was necessary to compete as this game went along. That said, I did end up being right about the narrative shit, and if you look up Nikola Jokic and the word fraud or choker or something along those lines on Twitter, I guarantee you you're going to get plenty of results, and I guarantee you most of them will be brain dead, because frankly, given what he had to face, I think Jokic did about as good as he could. Now, of course, I have seen some people argue that we just shouldn't give the Nuggets or Jokic any level of criticism. I'm like, no, you did blow the biggest Game 7 lead ever. That is not good, and it says something about you more than it even says something about Minnesota, frankly, and that's just not what you want. That said, I think the word fraud is just way too black and white for really just about any actual basketball criticism that I would provide. You know, it's not, even when I put fraud or something like that in the title or thumbnail, in the video, am I actually calling a guy a fraud? Fraud's just not really a very helpful term. You know, it's fun, it's cute, it's enjoyable, memeable. People love that on Twitter. I get it. But in terms of the value it brings to actual basketball discourse, it's far more in the negative than it is in the positive. I wouldn't even really, in truth, not in a tongue-in-cheek manner, call Kevin Durant a fraud. I mean, he kind of is now, but I'm just talking about for his entire career. I just think a lot of people don't realize how declined he actually has just because his stats technically look a little bit similar or pretty similar. However, I would call John Stockton a fraud because he is, so there is that. Jamal, probably his best playoff game, and the fact that that happened and they still lost this game, that's pretty scary because honestly, this was what you were waiting for the entire time. Obviously, Nikola Jokic did not necessarily have his best showing, but he didn't have a bad one either. He ended up with 28, 19, and 5 or something. Like, still good-ass numbers. Efficiency was kind of bad. Took too many threes, so not his best, but a good game, and you got a good Jamal Murray game. The fact that you got a good game from the both of them, and you got a terrible game from Anthony Edwards, how do you win that one? At least in terms of shooting, we got a terrible game from Anthony Edwards. We'll talk about that more in the Minnesota takeaways. But it just actually baffles my mind that they managed to lose this game with a 20-point lead and with their two best players going off. And really, that's because the way that ended up going was everybody else. Everybody else fucked up. Everybody else was not doing enough. No kind of production off of the bench whatsoever, which isn't necessarily surprising, but it's been a problem for them this entire way. There was Michael Porter Jr., who went completely ice cold in this series. Like, he started off good, and he was very good in that Lakers round one matchup, like averaging 23 points per game on like ridiculous splits. But he started missing these shots. And Minnesota, they're both cold places in the West. That's all I remember. So I mix them up sometimes. Michael Porter, if he's not hitting that shot, slowly but surely, Minnesota got more and more comfortable giving it to him. I'm not saying they were leaving the guy open, but they were a little bit more okay bringing help onto other players off of Michael if they had a way to get back to him in a decent enough time, when normally you wouldn't even dare to give him that second of daylight. You can give Michael a second of daylight now, and there's a decent chance he's not even going to hit the shot. Because of that, makes it easier to double Jokic, makes it easier to double Jamal Murray. It's just not ideal. They really tried their best, and that's the best thing you really can do with the Nuggets, is the Timberwolves tried to make them score with the other guys. You know, they tried to make Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., KCP, try to make these guys the ones who would burn them, because if they beat you, then they beat you. It is what it is. They're not the Lakers. They're not going to lose a game because Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon had a good one. Like, they need those guys to go off, and they did, but they also need their role players to not completely shit the bed. Speaking of Aaron Gordon, for the series at large, I'll give him this. They left him wide open from three constantly. And guess what? He shot 58% for the entire series. 58% from three. Now, he still wasn't taking them at a high volume. He didn't take the open opportunities he got multiple times, so it overall is still a massive defensive plus. But for what it is worth, when Aaron actually shot the ball, it did go in. That didn't negate the strategy, but it did make it less effective than it otherwise would have been if he continued to be just a complete brick house. But like I said, the lack of bench. To me, that's what ended up standing out here. We got a good Naz Reid game off of the bench for the Timberwolves, and we've had multiple. I don't know if there's a game in this. I think there's maybe one game in this series where Denver had more bench points, and it was because like Reggie Jackson and someone else went off. Christian Brown, I think. Normally, not getting that from this team, and yeah, they just didn't have enough. As for what's next for them, we're going to talk about that in tomorrow's video. So stay tuned for that. Not tomorrow's video, 2 videos from now. Sorry. The 2024 All-NBA defensive teams are here. Your first team is Rudy Gobert, Victor Wembanyama, Bam Adebayo, Anthony Davis, and Herb Jones. Our second team is Alex Caruso, Drew Holiday, Jaden McDaniels, Jalen Suggs, and Derrick White. So, I think this is a pretty excellent team, and I think they did a pretty damn great job of utilizing what I believe to be how all defensive teams should have always worked. And just based on the ballots that I saw, specifically the one that I saw from JJ Redick, the discourse that I saw about all defense in the first place, I felt like a lot of people were going to miss a very important opportunity to make the all defensive first team essentially big men. And literally the only guy who's not a big man in that all defensive first team is a defensive wing who blocks shots and is a great help defender and weak side rim protector, and probably the best overall defensive player that's not a center in the entire NBA. So makes sense that he would make it. Alex Caruso, Drew Holiday, Jalen Suggs, Derrick White, some of the best defensive guards in the NBA. Now, I will throw this out there. I do think that there are probably a couple of defenders who are a little bit better than those guards just by virtue of them being guards. Now, I'm not upset about it given the fact that the first team is represented very adequately, but I do think you probably could have added 2 to 3 names to this while cutting out those different different guards. Obviously, Jaden McDaniels should have made it. But for me, it's fine. I'm just glad that Anthony Davis didn't end up on second team like he otherwise would have a year ago, or Bam Adebayo would have a year ago. This is a big improvement because for me, all defensive teams, I understand some people view it as the all defensive team should essentially be literally a team. Like you need a point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center. It's a team. It's a roster. I personally think it should be used as a historical document to accurately document who the 10 best defenders in the NBA are in that time frame. Because if you go back into history, there were multiple centers especially who were some of the best defenders in the league who would never make all defensive teams because we were in the golden age of centers and they just didn't have any way of competing, and then a bunch of much worse defenders ended up making the all defensive teams, which then subsequently means that we just don't have that historical document of who these 10 best players defensively were. I think we got a pretty good list here, and I think we probably have maybe the best one in the history of the NBA, just by virtue of it paying respect to the fact that the best defensive position in the game is center, the most impactful defensive position is pretty much always going to be center, and we should rightfully give it to these guys, the Rudy Goberts, the Wembys, the Bams, the ADs. Those are the guys who really need to win all defense first team. They really need to be put there. After that, I'm perfectly good with this list. Love that my boy Alex Caruso is on there. Crazy that Derek and Drew made it. I feel bad for Tyrese Halliburton. He's going to have a horrible conference finals maybe. But yeah, speaking of that, let's talk about the Western Conference Finals in our Mavericks versus Timberwolves series preview. So first things first, let's just talk matchups. And I think easily the biggest X factor for this entire playoffs, and I mean across the board, not just this game, I mean for the rest of this postseason, what will determine, if not who wins the championship, at least how the championship is won. That will be determined by Luka Doncic and specifically Luka's health. If you go ahead and look at his numbers thus far in the postseason, Luka has not been having a very good playoffs, and that's okay. We understand that that is happening because he has been dealing with an injury, and this isn't a case of like, is he injured, is he not, is it actually just an excuse, that game that people like to play? In reality, if you literally just watch the guy for a couple of minutes, you are going to quickly realize that he is not operating with the same level of physical ability as he normally otherwise would. Obviously, Luka is a slow player. That's his whole shtick, is that he does the drag step, or he pauses for a second and lets you go by him on the layup. But ultimately, he still uses bursts of speed every once in a while, and he uses them to his advantage. It's honestly the fact that he's slow that he uses to create this space. He initiates it slow, they expect him to stay slow, suddenly he's moving quicker than they expected. Now they're reacting to him moving quickly, and then they're treating him like he's a player that can move quickly, and then he suddenly is slow again, and they jumped too early, and now he's got a layup. That's just Luka's game right there, and not having the stop and go aspect, which I think Luka is masterful at. It's truly his best on-ball ability because he's so good at changing pace on a dime. Not having that ability has made it much harder for him to create space, and from that, having good defenders on him, at least decent ones, especially Lou Dort's physicality and effort and intensity on him, it's just a lot. It's a lot to deal with, because if you just can't create space and you're a shot creator, well, guess what? You're probably going to do a much worse job at shot creating. So, first of all, I think playing Game 6 in OKC and winning it, I think that was huge for Minnesota. I think winning that game makes a real, or not Minnesota, god damn it. It's good for the Dallas Mavericks. I think it was excellent for Dallas that they actually managed to win that OKC game in Game 6, not having to play a Game 7 and getting a couple of days for a break. You hope that that can be enough that Luka can get in better shape and maybe his injury will be less impactful. It's also very well possible that that doesn't happen. And even if it does, it's also very well possible that he could just be good at the start and then slowly lose his steam as he goes along, which is something that Luka's already done in playoff series in the past, and I don't think I would necessarily blame him for that. That was more a factor of the roster around him and the fact that he just had to do so much and had to carry so much and just simply didn't have the energy to win a playoff series single-handedly, and by the time he tried doing that for game after game after game, game. It drug him down. The fact that he has an injury to be concerned about on top of it could very well be the deciding factor of the series. And the worst part for Luka, multiple good defenders from the Timberwolves that they can throw at him. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Jaden McDaniels, occasionally Anthony Edwards, Kyle Anderson if he ends up playing. Regardless of which of those bodies are thrown at him, he is going to not have the easiest time with them. He's Luka. He's one of the best players in the NBA. I think he's the second best player in the NBA, so there is a very real shot he can dominate these guys regardless of both the injury and the defenders. I would say if I was Minnesota, I feel about as good about defending Luka Doncic going into this series as you feasibly could, to be honest, and that's a huge advantage going in. Anthony Edwards is going to be defending Kyrie. He said on his post-game interview for Game 7 that he was excited for the Kyrie matchup. I do think that he can do a good job in that one, especially if he takes it personally, takes on the assignment, which we've seen Anthony do at this point, so I have no reason to believe he won't do it again. As for, the bigs, I think it's probably just going to be PJ and Cat guarding each other. It's going to be Gobert and Lively guarding each other. As for the Gobert on a shooter thing, maybe you do run some small lineups, and that's what's actually interesting in terms of that strategy. I do think that PJ Washington can do a decent job guarding Cat. He's a little bit undersized, but he plays a lot bigger than he is. Also has that versatility on the perimeter, can keep up with him and has multiple different ways of scoring. I do think that Derrick Lively is going to have a lot on his plate in this series. He has to deal with Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid, and Karl Anthony Towns. That's a pretty ridiculous task, especially for a rookie center in a conference finals. That's a lot to ask. But at the same time, Derrick Lively has been asked to do a lot more than you would like to ask out of a rookie from the moment he set foot in the NBA, and he has only ever done that more than well enough. If not exceeding it, at the very least, doing his job every time. And I think he's a lot better than Daniel Gafford. I wasn't quite sure because, aesthetically, their games are very similar. The fact that they are so similar, it's almost redundant in a way. However, Lively moves a lot better. He makes much better decisions with the ball in his hands, which as a whole means you should play him more. And he did play more in that last series. As a result, he can't get in foul trouble. He can't be getting cooked one-on-one. He can't be making bad defensive mistakes in terms of his rotations. He must be locked in and he must be good. I don't think they can win if he isn't. It would be great to have Maxi Kleber back as another body that you can throw at the Karl Anthony Towns of the world. Honestly, the fact that you don't really have a great backup option there is a little concerning. I think Derrick Jones Jr. can survive on Cat, but I also don't know if that's the matchup you want. Cat's not a great post-up player, so you can probably survive it, but, it's not exactly ideal. Can't really do double bigs. They don't have the infrastructure for that. They're honestly quite small by comparison to the Timberwolves, and that has me concerned as well. I imagine Luka probably takes the Jaden McDaniels matchup. As we know, Kyrie probably has to take that Conley matchup. I'm trying to think of any world where they can get away with doing anything else. I think he's too small to handle the McDaniels mismatch. I don't think McDaniels post-ups are what Minnesota wants to do, but it is probably what they want to do if they have a 6'2" guy on him. So from that point of view, you really can't get away with that. I do think occasionally when Minnesota has Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the game instead of Conley, you can get away with switching that matchup in case you don't want to get Kyrie involved in too much screening action, involved in too much of the actual offensive set. Kyrie and Luka both have been great defenders in this postseason, at least relative to what you expect of them, but they're still going to get targeted. And speaking of that, Luka is also definitely going to get targeted, not just because he doesn't necessarily pose the biggest threat defensively in a one-on-one. Statistically, he actually has thus far in this postseason. However, he is also injured, at least kind of, making him feel you on the defensive end, making him put up that effort. That wears him out on the other end. And if he's dealing with a nagging injury on top of that, it's very, very plausible that there's just absolutely no shot that they can do anything in that circumstance. Luka will probably get in screen action. They're going to target him with Anthony Edwards. Jaden McDaniels, probably the screen setter in that instance. He's got to be able to roll pretty well. He's got to be able to set solid screens. Ideally, he's able to hit his threes well enough to make the defense respect him. He has thus far in the playoffs, but he's not exactly a lights-out guy, and he's had bad shooting games for sure. I believe he's at 37% from three in the playoffs. In general, the Luka thing there is maybe the solution is you have him drop, and you you just say, hopefully, Ant's defender can recover around the screen to get a decent enough contest, or someone else from the perimeter can dig or rotate over in some capacity. Either way, Luka has to be good in these matchups, has to be able to handle that switch if it comes to it. Same goes for Kyrie Irving. Same goes for Karl-Anthony Towns, because while Cat has also been someone who improved defensively, I think it's very plausible that Luka can just burn him literally on any switch, especially if he is healthy. Same goes for Kyrie Irving. He's a big man out there with being the power forward who can't really move his feet as well as you would like a power forward to. They would just be stupid if they didn't try to exploit that. And I think Dallas in general is a team that really likes targeting. I think targeting players on the defensive end, trying to bully them, trying to make them play defense, not letting them get away with having poor defensive players on the floor. Maybe you take away their offense by being a better offense because they have to put a better defensive player in. All of that stuff is very pivotal. Probably the most pivotal thing after that is how exactly is Dallas's shooting going to hold up? Because PJ Washington was freaking Klay Thompson in that series. That's unrealistic. He hit 23 threes in that entire series, more than Luka Doncic, and shot like 55%. Okay. 37% from Derrick Jones Jr. He shot 7 for 11 in the last 2 games of the Thunder series, which was very important, which is also an extremely high percentage if you are not aware of that. That definitely is going to matter because OKC had the strategy of just, okay, we're going to leave these shooters open. Let's see how you do. They did well. They did a lot better than I think they anticipated, and I don't know if Minnesota has much reason to try out that strategy, if not just for the fact that they think they can do it a little bit better, recover a little bit better when they do give up those opportunities, because that's the thing about Minnesota is their ability to cover the floor in a very short amount of time to get from one part of the court to the other in just a split second. It's very, very over the top. And I don't know, it almost is precedent breaking. It almost makes it hard for me to even talk about the defense in a way that is like, yeah, this is how defense works. It almost breaks the idea of what defense is, because theoretically you should be able to create a lot of advantages offensively, even against the best defense in the entire league. That's not happening a lot. It's not happening enough in that Nuggets series. And I think if anyone's got what it takes to stop Luka, especially given the injury, it's this team. I felt the same way about Nikola Jokic, and they're similar while different players. I always like to say that Jokic is the center version of Luka and vice versa. Luka's the point guard version of Jokic. They have very similar skill sets. They very much embody the idea of scoring gravity and generational playmaking being a deadly combination, but it's the Wolves. Their defense is really good. Is it going to be enough? As for my actual prediction, it depends on Luka's injury. As I mentioned, it's the X factor. So I'm going to do 2 predictions: healthy Luka and not so healthy Luka. And actually, let's go ahead and make it 3. Extremely unhealthy bad Luka, I'm going to call that a 5-game series for Minnesota. Kind of what Luka's been on average to this point for the series. I'll call it 6 for Minnesota. If Luka is Luka and there is only minor instances of him hobbling or only minor amounts of him being a little bit worse, if he's just 5% worse instead of 30 or 40, I think they win this series in 6 or 7 games. I would probably lean 7 because I just don't feel like Minnesota is going to give up. Yeah, this kind of sucks though. I really hope his injury doesn't end up affecting it, because otherwise, I'm trying to think of a conference finals matchup that has potential for better basketball than this in the last couple of years. It's been a while since I have seen 2 teams that I have wanted to see play like this. I mean, I knew the conference finals was going to be great, knowing who the Final Four was. Can't say the same for the East, but I'm very excited. Either way, regardless of how this goes. I think it should be a fun one. I am going to be covering every game, hopefully almost as soon as they come out. Look out for that. That is going to be happening. All right. Yeah, thanks for watching. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video. Nick's going to be back soon, so hopefully we can have these coming out a little bit more consistently. But that is it. Goodbye.